Good morning from Mrs. Tillman here at the Art Farm. I'm glad you're joining us. Today we're going to be doing some painting together. And this little tree right here behind me, this is an apple tree. And these white blossoms are a sign that it is early spring. And today we're going to be painting a little twig with white blossoms off of this apple tree. But first, can you hear the birds? Okay, so here's our apple blossom twig with our beautiful little apple blossoms. Let's look closely at this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 white petals. And what other colors do you see? I see some green, some brown in the middle, some little bits of yellow. And of course we have the stem or the twig. This green, these are tiny little blossoms that haven't bloomed. I want you to begin by thinking about your composition. The word composition refers to the space that you're filling. It might be a canvas, it might be a piece of paper, and how big or how small I draw, and how I fill up this space, that's our composition. We're going to begin by drawing this first little blossom. I'm going to start in the very center of the blossom with our light brown center, and I'm going to draw what's called the stamen. These long white strings with a tiny little yellow dot on the end. Look very closely as you draw those petals. Remember, you can take your time. You can pause the video and go back and rewind and watch it again. Okay, so from our first blossom, our twig comes out and reaches up towards the corner of our paper. So let's do that. Toward that first blossom. So I'm going to bring this stem down. We've got a little bud coming out off the side over there. I'm going to go with this one. Now it's laying down. It's a different perspective. We're not looking at it straight on. So I'm going to draw it a little differently. Watch how I do this. I'm going to start with that center again, but it's more of an oval instead of a circle. Let's do some more of those stamen. Most of them are reaching out in this direction because this flower is laying on its side. So I'm only going to draw the stamen coming this way. This first petal, you don't really see the whole thing. It's actually called foreshortening, when you draw something that's sort of looking straight on at it. And then the next petal reaches out in that direction. The two petals that are on the bottom are more like these shapes. We see them sort of straight on. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know we need a fifth petal. It's this one. And it's also kind of laying over on its side. So it's very narrow or thin compared to these. And that's how you make that flower look like it's facing off in a different direction. You also can see the very tiny stem from which that flower opened. So we'll do that. And we're just going to let that go and attach itself to the main stem, like that. Okay. When I look at my paper again and I look at my composition, I don't really think I need all of those flowers. I'm just going to add one more large blossom right here and then let this stem kind of go off in the other direction. Ooh, that is looking beautiful. I'm sure yours is looking beautiful too. Let's take this stem as it continues on. Now this stem, of course, goes under that blossom, so it disappears, and then it comes back out. You see it again on the other side. And there it is. In addition to letting the white show through, we also like to add a lot of water to our colors that are in our palette. That's kind of the point of watercolor. Using lots of water lets you dilute the color, so you can have a really rich, deep blue, for example, or a soft, pale blue. And you get that technique by just adding more water. So I'm going to take some of our rich blue, and you can see how deep and rich that is. And then when I add water, it becomes a lighter blue, and even a much lighter blue. And you can see how the blue is going from a dark to a light, just based on the fact that I'm adding water. Now, the first thing we're going to paint is our background. We always like to paint what is in the back first, and then move forward, painting what is called the foreground. So you can use any color you want for your background. I'm going to use sort of a spring blue or a light blue. Also, I want you to notice that when you lay color down on your paper, this is called wet to dry. So my brush is wet and my paper is dry. So if I paint wet on dry, it looks like this. The paint really stays where you put it, and you can have more control. But the fun part of using watercolor is to add more water and let those colors sort of do their own thing. When you add water, those colors just bleed and blend and begin to do their own thing. Watch what happens when I drop a bit of blue right in the middle of that water. And it just begins to move and bleed and make its own design, and that's one of the beautiful things about watercolor. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of that. I'm going to paint with wet on dry, so wet to dry, that's wet paint in my brush on dry paper. And then sometimes I'm going to paint wet to wet, which is what I just did when I drop wet paint into wet paper. All right, so let's do that. Again, you can choose any color you want. I'm painting my background blue. At this point, I'm going to let my background dry. Sometimes I even take a blow dryer and dry it quickly. or you can set it out in the sunlight and let it dry that way, or just let it dry naturally. Okay, so let's start adding some of our color. We're going to start with the stem. Now there is some brown on this stem, but there's also some gray. So I added a tiny bit of brown here on my palette. I'm going to add a little bit more of this deep brown. And just like with the blue, if you add more water, you're going to get a lighter color of brown. I want you to look at where the brown is. The deeper brown parts are like little dots near the blossoms. So let's add a little bit of brown. You'll remember that we talked about leaving the white paper to show through for most of the white color in our petals, but if you look really closely in there, there's some gray, there's a little bit of shadowing. So let's go in and get a tiny bit of black, which diluted with our water is going to become gray. And it's very, very light gray. So a lot of water. And then we're going to go and just touch our petals and put a tiny bit of gray. It can be very, very light, almost where you don't see it a lot. These little shadows are so light. If you make them too dark, then the white petals may not appear white anymore. And we do want them to appear white, even though there's a little bit of shadowing in there. Okay, so let's look at some of the other colors. We have a little bit of green in the middle here, tiny, tiny green, almost like little leaves on the tiny inside of the petal. Of course, we have green on the unopened blossoms. And we have the yellow at the end of the stamen. Let's start adding all of those other colors. Listen for the birds. Thank you for painting with me today. I hope you'll post a photo of your painting in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.